Thanks for coming. I'm Linda Levenshires. I'm chair of the Belmont Democratic Town Committee, one of the proud co-sponsors of this event with Belmont's Human Rights Commission. And Kim, who chairs that committee, is going to talk in a second. But I just want to thank everybody for coming. This is obviously a really important topic. Our communities all across the state and the country are being impacted. I want to just set up a couple of ground rules. We have a mic for people to ask questions after our speakers finish talking. Please be respectful. Please don't shout from the audience. I know a lot of us, might want to say something in the moment, but try to refrain and just be respectful. So we are so excited to have our District Attorney Marian Ryan here tonight, our Belmont Chief of Police Jamie MacIsaac, and Immigration Attorney Elizabeth Goss to speak to us. So thank you again for coming, and Kim, why don't you say a couple of words as well?
Good evening, everyone. I won't be long. I'm Kim Haley-Jackson, Chair of the Belmont Human Rights Commission, so I am really happy to see everyone come out tonight. I'm sorry it's under these circumstances, but, so quick announcement. In the back table there, I have some literature. I have some wallet cards for everyone to take home with you. Place those in your wallets and give them to your friends. It lets you know what to do if you are approached by ICE, right? It lets you know your rights about, like, show me a badge number. You don't even have to speak. Just put the card up so you can see it. You can put it in the front door of your home. Also, a flyer detailing out your rights. We have it in 4 different languages. We have English, Simplified Chinese, Haitian Creole, and Spanish. So again, please take those and share them with your neighbors. And if you have any questions, you can contact us at belmont.hrc@gmail.com. And with that, I'd like to start the program.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out to have what I hope will be a helpful conversation. We have great panelists here with me tonight, and I think we'll have a chance to really explore some of these issues. I think one of the things that I have to say is that in Middlesex County, right now, frankly, we don't have a lot to report. And I guess that's a good thing, because we have not seen any situations that have caused the local police to respond or ICE to arrest anybody else besides anybody that they might be looking for. So there haven't been any situations where bystanders have gotten involved. ICE has scrupulously, to the line, followed what they're allowed to do with respect to when they come to court. So the one thing that they are allowed to do if they come to court is that if a person comes to court in custody, so that person was arrested, they're being held, their case is on, and they are brought to court in custody. The Department of Corrections brings them. And for whatever reason, they are going to be released. So maybe the judge has set bail and they're going to make that bail. Maybe their case got disposed and their sentence is going to be probation, so they're leaving. Maybe their case got dismissed, whatever it is. If they are going to be leaving, and ICE has authority to arrest them, they are allowed to take them. They, so far, have done nothing except that, which is very different than the situation we were seeing a few years ago, where we would literally be in the middle of a trial, and somebody would take a lunch break, and the person who was on trial, or maybe a witness, would just disappear. So they have not done that. And they also, with the exception of a few of the pretty public takings, have been fairly quiet here. I don't want to jinx us. I think that in part may be because we sued them before, and no one's really up for a rematch, which I'm not up for a rematch either. I'm not looking for that. So I think that has been good. I think 2 things. I think one is what we can't report about is what may be happening that no one is talking about. So, for instance, we have a case. We'll have a case. A witness is subpoenaed to come to court. That witness doesn't show up. Now, that happens with lots of people who are fully documented. For whatever reason, they've changed their mind, they don't show up. But somebody who may have a fear of coming doesn't show up. We have no way of knowing what that was. Was that because they legitimately changed their mind about did they want to be involved in the process, or is it they're afraid to go down the street to the courthouse? So we don't know that, and we don't have a way to know that. And it's much the same as we certainly know, and we're hearing from all of our partners in the schools and in the hospitals, you know, people aren't showing up for their doctor's appointment. They're not showing, the kids aren't going to school. So we don't know what that is. Is that it's June and kids don't want to be going to school right now? Is it I changed my mind about whether I have to go to the doctor? Or is it I'm afraid to be there? It's probably a combination of both, but we can't pull those numbers out. The other piece, and I think this is what I hope we talk a little bit tonight, and some of you have heard me tell this story, is I think it is not just what we see of what's happening. It's not even the incidents of people being afraid that we can't figure out. It is, in my task of protecting the public safety, what is the impact of what's happening to public safety because of what we're doing? And I tell this example all the time. A few years ago, up in Lowell, where we have lots of very big sort of block buildings with maybe 6, 9, 12 apartments in them. They are big balloon construction buildings where fire spreads through them in a minute. We had a terrible fire one night in the winter at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. Those buildings burn in a second. There were many, many people living in that building, the vast majority of whom were fully documented. We unfortunately lost a child in that fire. We would likely have lost dozens more people, except that from a building across the street, a woman was leaving at 4:30 in the morning to go to her job. She saw the smoke in that building, and she ran through the building banging on the doors, waking people up. She was, by all accounts, a hero. I don't know if I would run into a burning building, especially those rickety old buildings, but she went through banging and banging and got people out of there. And when we got there, we wanted to celebrate her for what she had done, and we're thanking her, and people wanted to thank her. And her concern was not for herself, but would somehow her 911 call lead back to her aunt and uncle who had taken her in the building across the street and who had been here for decades but were undocumented. And she was terrified that somehow ICE would be able to trace that 911 call. And leaving aside the cruelty of some things that are happening, not one person in those situations is made safer by some of the things that we have happen. And if that woman, because she was so afraid, walked down the street, as she certainly could have done, got on her bus and went to work, that's what I worry about, is what's the net effect? And I don't know how we capture that. We certainly are not in a position where we really can be reassuring people, because we really can't make any promises. And in fact, things seem to change every single day. Some days, I saw a little clip today on the news. Today it seems to be we're only taking people with criminal records. But I was at a meeting with some of our federal partners the other day, and that was what they said. But in the next breath, they said, if you are here and you don't have the proper documents, then you have a federal record. So we just kind of went in this very circular conversation. So the good news is we haven't seen a terrible amount of activity here. The concerning news is what it means for all of us and what is going on and what is the impact on people that we just do not have a way to measure. So I'm looking forward to the rest of the conversation, and I think I'm turning it over to Chief MacIsaac. Thank you.
Hi, Chief Jamie MacIsaac. Some of you know me. I think the probably best thing to do for me is Linda was nice enough to send me a couple of questions and kind of go over those. And then if you have follow-up questions, we can all help answer the questions. One of the questions was what work in Belmont has taken place so far in terms, not of ICE, but in terms of me being asked questions and working with different groups. So when, I don't know, it was a couple of months ago, I started getting a couple of different emails from people asking me about ICE. And my response at that time, and it's still somewhat the same today, I know FBI agents, I know ATF agents, I know people who are U.S. Marshals. I don't know anybody who is an ICE agent. We've never, in my 26 years, have interacted with ICE at any level. I'm not aware of anybody in my department that ever did. I know that area departments sometimes have detectives attached to drug DEA task force and things like that, but ICE is just something that I'm totally unfamiliar with. So that was along my response was, we don't really get involved in it here. And I also didn't think that we would see ICE agents here in Belmont. I was just telling somebody before, I think that's maybe changed a little bit over the last few months from my interaction with other police chiefs that have had ICE in their communities. So the work with Belmont has been to inform them, and I'll inform you in just a minute about how municipal police and state police in Massachusetts, what their involvement is with ICE and what they can and can't do. So I've been in touch via email and with the Belmont Human Rights Commission a little bit, but nothing on this level. One of the questions is, does ICE inform us if they're coming? Some of the chiefs I know found out two ways how ICE was coming. One chief in Natick said that they found out that ICE was there when they staged in their parking lot. They didn't get any advance call or anything. They just came out, the SUVs were in the parking lot, and ICE was staging, never called the station at all. I know that happened in Norwood a couple of weeks ago. Same thing, they just staged in the parking lot. I know they staged in the Natick Fire Department at one time. Chief in Hudson said she got a call that they were coming, or they were there. So I think it probably depends on knowing organizations the way I know organizations. It probably depends who's running that team that day, whether they're going to call or just show up. But that's just more of a law enforcement courtesy, and there's nothing we can do or tell anybody that they're coming, that they're going there. So it's just more to keep people safe, maybe to keep them safe. So if they do get the call, I know that in one community they got a 911 call that there were armed men with masks and bulletproof vests on the street. And the chief had concern because he had newer officers working that day. And so, that's where that kind of professional courtesy should be extended to a local agency. I don't have any personal experience, though, that I can talk about in terms of them enforcing, notifying us prior to them working. But it's also important to note that, because people have asked me, well, what will the police do if there's, if there's something, would we get in the way? It's been made clear to us that local police and state police can be charged with federal crimes, just like anybody else. So if we were to get in their way or do something like that, or if I knew ICE was coming and called somebody and told them ICE is coming, I could very well face an obstruction charge, federal charge. So that's been made clear to us through the different chiefs organizations that I'm a member with and their attorneys. Will police assist in an arrest? That was one of the questions. And so this is how you have to look at it. And the two panelists next to me probably know more about this than I do, because it's very, as I said, we really don't move in this arena very often. But you have to make a distinction between civil detainers from ICE and when you have a judicial warrant. So the very first thing anybody hears about ICE is these civil detainers or these detainer holds where if we arrest somebody and we find out they have a detainer, you know, the idea is that you hold them for ICE to come get them. We can't do that in Massachusetts. There was a case, the Lund case, that prohibits police from working on civil detainers. It's actually an unlawful arrest. So if we were to arrest somebody that was undocumented and they had a civil detainer, and I said, hey, call ICE, and I said, we'll be there in 8 hours, and we held that person for 8 hours, that would be illegal on the police. So we don't hold people. The way it worked, and I'm trying to think, we probably, over the course of my 26 years that I know about, maybe 2 ICE detainers, but in a local PD like this, we're not interested in holding people for any length of time. So when we would pass them off, whether it was to the court or to the sheriff's department, now we would say, you know, hey, just so you know, there's an ICE detainer. And what they do with it is up to them. So we can't enforce the civil ICE violations. What we could enforce, and what, again, I've never have seen any of these, is if you had a judicial warrant signed by a judge, an arrest warrant, we would treat it just like it came from the FBI, the DEA, or any other federal agency. You know, ICE is a federal law enforcement agency. I've never seen, I don't know any time that we've arrested anybody on a federal warrant, but that is the one time when if somebody was undocumented and there was a warrant issued for them by a judge, and you know we encountered that person and ran them through the system, and the warrant came up. It would be just like if you were a Massachusetts resident and had a warrant out for your arrest for stealing motor vehicles or something. So we would never help if, I don't think there would be any situation when ICE would call us and say that they want us to help arrest somebody. I don't, and furthermore, Article 10 of the U.S. Constitution prohibits, we cannot be compelled to enforce federal law or work with ICE. So they can't come in and say, Belmont Police, you now have to work with ICE. They can't do that. We can volunteer to do it. I know towns in New Hampshire have done it, and I think Manchester, New Hampshire, and some other ones have got on board. But we cannot be compelled to enforce federal law. So that's, you know, that's something that's good. And everybody, police officers in chiefs organizations, and I say chiefs organizations, and I kind of make a delineation between sheriffs organizations and chiefs organizations. Sheriffs throughout, in Massachusetts, they hold a different role, but like down in Florida, Arizona, Texas, they're all elected. They're politicians, basically, right? But the chiefs organizations talk about this, and just what District Attorney Ryan talked about is the importance of maintaining trust within your community. And, you know, we want people to feel safe to come to the police department regardless of what their situation is. So we would never, and I don't know any of my colleagues in any of the other communities around here would ever volunteer to cooperate with ICE in that way, in the federal, you know, to start doing immigration enforcement. So I think in Belmont, you know, the message is always the same. You know, there's a lot going on in the world, and I've always said this, I focus on what's going on here in our community. And we want our community members to know that, you know, to feel safe, and that if they're victims of crime or anything, they need any kind of help, they can come to the police department, and we do not communicate with ICE or cooperate in that way with them. So that's, you know, what I have right now, and any further questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Hi, thanks for having me. So I look at this from a different perspective. Immigration in general is being attacked at all levels, both folks who are undocumented and folks who are documented. And what we're seeing over the last few months is I feel like there's a punch list of different categories that the government has, and they're making spectacles on the fringe ends of it. That's what gets highly publicized. It stokes fear, anxiety. People are being hurt, and terrible things are happening. So I'm not diminishing that, but a lot of these things were happening before. I mean, we used to call Obama the deporter in chief. That particular administration deported a lot of people. I would say the extremeness of the situation is times 100, but there are definitely some things that were happening before that we're just having more notice of in the news, and it's being more highlighted. The other thing that is happening at the same time is that our immigration law is quite antiquated. We haven't had reform since 1990, and it needed an overhaul long before then. And there's just been no political will, really, in the last decades to get the system, to reflect what is happening in our society today, what kinds of immigrants we need, the workforce, who's coming here and why. And as a result, what has happened is there's been a lot of creation of different pathways, trying to work within the structure. There's been use of temporary protective status to allow, extensions of humanitarian options, and all different kinds of configurations that different administrations have tried to do to allow to have more people come to the United States and to fit what we actually need for society. So that big gap between Congress actually doing their job and what we need as a society has created a lot of this space in terms, to allow for these things to happen. The other thing that we've done, unfortunately, very well since 9/11, we've done a lot of enforcement with very little pro-immigration benefit. So it's been lopsided in terms of the negotiation, in terms of what we've seen in laws that have been passed. So like the Lake and Riley Act that was just passed at the beginning, I don't know if it was the end of the Biden administration, the beginning of the Trump administration. So it's just been an unfortunate fact that our laws are not really reflective of what we need in society. The other thing I will say before I get into some of the, what you can do as a bystander and things like that, is that the estimates for people who are undocumented in this country are anywhere from 11 million to 15 million. Most of those people actually are documented. They either have an asylum process, they're DACA, maybe they have temporary protective status, or they have parole. So most of them have actually some kind of documentation that allow them to be here and work here in the US. And what this administration is doing on a routine basis is revoking some of those options. The parole, Ukraine parole they revoked. You see in the news all the time that they're stopping temporary protective status for Venezuelans, Haitians. They are limiting asylum. They are, looking at people who arrived at the border within the last 2 years and allowing for expedited removal, a process with far less protections and rights and access to courts. And so they are slowly making groups of people who actually have some kind of documents undocumented. So that's something that we're watching as immigration attorneys. These are the groups of people that we expect that they'll be going after in the future. And we might see more workforce raid enforcement. So for example, I don't know this for a fact, I'm speculating, but I'm guessing that a lot of the people who clean the floors of patient rooms are working in nursing homes, or working in skilled nursing facilities, taking care of our kids, our parents, making our food at restaurants, might actually have one of these types of documentation, either their asylum applications or their TPS, temporary protective status, and have work authorization to work legally in this country, but those are slowly being revoked. And so we may see some activity in those spaces as the government, if they succeed, right? There's injunctions that are being filed in court. We're definitely winning in court, so the battle's not over yet, but that's sort of the space that we look at in, as far as in immigration, of what might come next. Being undocumented in America is a civil violation. It's not a criminal violation. There are people who, if they have been convicted of felonies, if they have been convicted of certain crimes of moral turpitude, they are deportable. So those are the people who there would be a reason maybe to put them in procedures, and they should have due process and have the right to defend themselves, but there are people who might actually be deportable under the law. I think one of the questions I've been asked to address is, what do we do as a bystander? What are the things that we can do as a bystander if we see any of these interactions? Again, a reminder that an ICE warrant is an administrative warrant. So if somebody is in their house, they don't have to answer the door for an administrative warrant, right? It's not a judicial warrant. It's not backed by a court. So there's no obligation for somebody to let somebody else into a private space with just an administrative warrant. If they're out in the public space, that's different, right? They can be arrested, with that warrant and detained by ICE out in the public space. So if you're a witness to that, one of the things that you can do, remain calm, keep your distance, record, date stamp, narrate. Get information about who is the law enforcement officer. Is it an ICE officer? Is it an HSI officer, which is a different division of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services? What are the cars? Are they marked? License plates, badge numbers. I think, and also find out if you can get close to the person. Do they have a safety plan? Do they have a lawyer? And that's the converse. What we're advising individuals to do is to make sure that they have a safety plan. Do they have an access to a lawyer? Do they have contacts with groups that are able to help them? Because one of the things that we know in the current system is that if somebody is detained, what we want to do almost immediately is get into federal court as soon as possible and get a habeas filed, because that stops the government from moving these people down the line in terms of physical location. So one of the things that ICE and the federal government is very good at doing is arresting somebody in Massachusetts, but then immediately wanting to move them out of state. And unfortunately, they want to move them to places like Louisiana, where access to lawyers and access to defending their rights becomes much more difficult. And we used to see this before. I dealt with individuals in the first Trump administration where South Bay used to have an agreement with ICE where they would keep detainees there. And I remember under the first Trump administration, I was going over there to visit with individuals who were detained. And then in the middle of that, actually, I forget who it was, they stopped that agreement. And my clients were then moved to Plymouth. And then within a couple of days, they were moved to upstate New York, right? And so that's when in the past, you'd have a few days notice and you'd be able to get access to them. That's not happening anymore. So that's like one of the most important things, is to try to make sure that we can get access to that person immediately, connect them with an attorney, and get some kind of habeas petition filed to stop ICE from moving them down the line. A federal habeas, a lawyer would have to do that. There are resources out there. I know that that there is some funding that's been allocated in the state budget. I also know that Susan Church, who is I forget what her title is, CEO of the Mass Refugee and Immigrant. There are people who are working on it. The American Immigration Lawyers Association New England chapter is also, the MIRA. There's lots of good organizations that are working on these activities and people who are being trained. I know that there were a lot of criminal defense attorneys who are trained on how to do habeases. We've all, as an immigration attorney, we know who. We're talking, we know who's filing in court. I've made relationships with people that I can go to and access in different states. So there are networks. I think they're building. I don't think they're where we want it to be yet, but I think people are working on these networks to be able to access that. But individuals themselves need to know that that's an option, and that there are ways that they can maybe connect with people, have a safety plan in terms of who knows where they are, phone information, information about who to call, information about where their documents are. So to just have something, and I think even if nothing happens, it's good to have a safety plan. We're even advising people at that level, people who are worried about travel. With the recent travel bans and all the problems with the student visa revocations, that's one of the biggest questions that we get, is it safe to travel? And we get that from everyone, from U.S. citizens to people, these are, most of the people I'm talking to are all documented, and we're advising them to have some sort of safety plan. And I'll take more questions. I can go into more details, but I think the best thing you can do if you are in a situation where you see something happening and you want to document it, don't post it on social media. I would not live stream it, because you don't want to also give access to information accidentally about the person who may be subject to the arrest. So you might be inadvertently putting them at risk. So you want to make sure that recording it, narrating, date stamping, getting factual information is extremely helpful, so that you can, that could be good evidence in the future, and it could also help that person to get the access they need to help. I know there's been a question.
Michael McNamara, 41 Marlborough Street. I wanted to ask if anyone felt comfortable answering this, but especially the police chief, I think maybe this is more aimed to, but I think one of the worries that I've heard from other states, not necessarily here, is that if someone who is an ICE agent or several folks were trying to grab someone, we're trying to say, hey, look, we're doing this, that if they're not wearing a badge, or if they're not wearing identification, or if they're in a military style clothing and having a weapon, is there a risk that there could be an accidental issue where someone sees this as a mass shooting, unfortunately, which has also been in the news, and if someone didn't know they were an ICE agent, there could be a confrontation between local police and the ICE agent, because local police, especially if maybe they're, as Chief mentioned, a newer officer, may see an armed guard and may go into immediately see this as like, this is an attack of the community. So like, how does that get resolved? Because I could really see an incident happening where the police are pumped full of adrenaline, they're really worried about the community, they're worried about something happening, and the ICE agent may not know how to respond. You see where I'm going with this? I worry about the consequence of an accidental injury or harm. Or, and this is sort of a separate question, my second part of the question is there a risk that someone could impersonate an ICE officer and do something? We've obviously recently in the news have seen a horrible incident in the state of Minnesota. So, thank you.
Thank you for the question. Absolutely, as you just stated, we saw that in Minnesota, where someone posed as a police officer, had lights on his vehicle and everything. So, what I talked about earlier was that I'll call it law enforcement courtesy. There were times when we would go arrest somebody in a neighboring community on a warrant, say it was Watertown. We would call Watertown and say, we're going to be over there. There have been times in the past when state police detectives have done work in Belmont, and they call us and say, we're going to be on, Upland Road or whatever. And the reason you do that is twofold. So we don't bother them, and blow their cover, but also so we don't have an incident like you spoke of. I think, and I don't know anything about their tactics or anything, but I think if you see 4 or 5, 6 individuals there, that is more of an indication of, it would be ICE. And I do believe that they do wear, identification, whether it's Homeland Security, FBI, ATF, or ICE, that would be on their vest. And, we, as law enforcement, we're trained not to shoot first, to kind of identify what the threat is. So that's the intent, but anything's possible. That's why I think it's always prudent to get a heads up that they're going to be in the neighborhood.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Really quick follow-up. I think something that has been raised by the Minnesota tragedy is the fear that obviously someone could attempt to impersonate a cop, but I think also there's a fear that someone could attempt to impersonate someone who's an ICE officer. And obviously that would be a real fear, because then that could not only make it so people are, including people who are the officers, are questioning of someone who's wearing ICE identification, even if they are wearing a badge and everything else, or potentially could lead to an issue where there's a lack of trust of like, I'm getting arrested, but are you ICE? Are you not ICE? How do I know this? So I think that's another fear I've heard from people in other communities, not necessarily here.
Yeah, that's, I guess that's something that federal agencies deal with all the time, right? We hire new officers, we put their picture on Facebook, and you see them around. You might not know them, but you generally, there's a chance you've seen them before if you live in town for any amount of time. And if an FBI agent showed up at your door, you don't, you have to see ID and things like that. So that's kind of the risk that I think we live with when you have federal law enforcement working in your community.
Thank you.
I mean, we rarely see ICE working alone, right? It rarely is ICE working alone, and also that on the cars, the license plate are clearly federal, ID'd as federal. So if you witness something and you're documenting and you notice that it's not a federal license plate, and also ICE is, they have their badges, but we haven't really seen any enforcement where one officer is acting alone. So if you saw something like that, that might be something that would trigger you to know that this wasn't quite right.
Hi, Mike Crowley. I would just like to ask a follow-up to the previous question for Chief MacIsaac. If we had, say, 6 masked men show up in unmarked vans, people aren't sure what the license plates are. They called the police, they called 911. That might be a natural thing to do because we don't know who these people are. They haven't identified themselves. Can the police, without facing a federal obstruction charge, report to the scene, request identification, and then politely back off? And would you do that? Would our officers do that?
Yes, I think that would, that's what naturally would happen. One thing we can't do is refuse to go to a call, right? So if someone calls 911 and says, regardless of what they have there, and they're requesting us to come, we can't say, well, we're not coming. So that would certainly happen. Not to take the discussion further, but I think, and others might know more than me, but that's similar to what happened in Worcester, if you saw that event unfolded there. But that event was, they got called, and then Worcester residents ended up being arrested by, I don't really want to talk about it, I don't know that much about it, but we would go. We cannot refuse to go to a call. And that would be the thing we would hopefully, they would know what was going on and identify themselves to us.
But if they didn't identify themselves, could you request identification of
Sure.
the masked individuals? And could you require it? Because,
Yeah, I don't think, as I said, ICE is a law enforcement organization. If
we don't,
no, but they're
so
not.
in this hypothetical situation, we don't know who they
Yeah,
are.
I know, but I'm not going to play hypotheticals. They're gonna ID themselves to us if we go. They're not going to not ID themselves.
Okay,
ICE is very clear that they will identify themselves to other law enforcement.
okay. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I hope everybody can hear me clearly. My name is Mark D'Andrea. I've been a Belmont citizen and resident for 85 years. Let me start by using the words public safety, which this woman on the right used at the very beginning, very key word. And I believe that we all can agree that one of the most important functions and responsibilities of the Belmont Police Department is to promote and ensure public safety. Now, what about ICE? ICE is the United States Immigration and Customs and Enforcement Agency under the Department of Homeland Security. Its primary mission is to promote Homeland Security and public safety through the enforcement of federal laws governing border control, customs, trade, and immigration. So we see that both the Belmont Police Department and ICE have the same objective of promoting and ensuring public safety. Now, my foremost concern as a citizen of Belmont My foremost concern and fear is the thought of having unvetted people committing crimes here in Belmont. My most concern and fear is the thought of having unvetted people committing crimes here in Belmont. So now I have two questions. And I can read them one at a time. We could do them both at the same time. First one is for the chief. Is Belmont taking advantage of services that ICE can provide to help prevent unvetted people from committing crimes in Belmont? Can Belmont take advantage of services that ICE can provide to help prevent unvetted people from committing crimes in Belmont? Because I told you my big fear is having unvetted people committing crimes in Belmont. And I'm an 88-year-old senior.
So I share that concern with public safety. And if we have somebody committing crimes in Belmont, the primary responsibility for addressing that, which is done very well, is by the Belmont Police Department. If they arrest somebody, they charge somebody with whatever it is, breaking into houses, they charge them. My confidence lies with our partnership with our office and the police to prosecute them. If somebody is found not guilty, fine. If they are found guilty and they should be held accountable, to me, it doesn't make any difference what their status is. If we find somebody that either because the police see it or we've done an investigation and they're charged with that crime, that's what our court system is for, is to hold them accountable.
Okay, but my concern is about unvetted people, and I think we all agree that no unvetted people should be walking around Massachusetts or in the 50 United States.
Well, I think what is true, okay, so why don't we just wait one sec? I think what is true is that people who are committing crimes should be held accountable. I don't think it matters whether they're documented or not.
I'm using the word vetted.
Right, but
Vetted is the word.
but what does vetted mean?
Vetted means that they have been looked into and it's been decided that it's okay to walk the streets.
But that's not true for probably any of us.
Well, I'm not talking about any of us.
Because some of you I've seen out there, and it's not pretty.
I'm not talking about any of us because I'm walking around the streets of Belmont and I don't know who's vetted and who isn't vetted anymore. I don't know that.
But I don't think we ever knew that. I think the issue is do you have more to be worried about in some places? Not really Belmont. We're a pretty safe county. So people who, yes, you go to a dangerous area and there are people out there, might somebody there commit a crime? Yes. And if they do, without regard to how they got here or what their status is, we should be holding them accountable. And frankly, if we hold someone accountable, if somebody commits a murder, for instance, the most serious crime, and we're investigating that and the Belmont police have charged them, frankly, if they get convicted, what I want them is sitting in a jail in Massachusetts being held accountable for that crime. That is how I feel safest, is when our courts put due process in place. You're convicted, you're not convicted, fine. You're convicted, I want to know where you are. To your point, I want to know where you are if you just committed a murder. I want you in a jail someplace here in Massachusetts where I know where you are.
Okay, but I wanted to know from the Belmont Police Department if there are services that ICE can actually do that benefit the town of Belmont. That's my question.
ICE's real service is ascertaining what somebody's status in this country is.
My question is for the chief.
Well, okay.
I'm not aware of any service. If I called ICE and said, I want your help, I don't know what they would say with what, and I don't know what I would tell them. Because if you listen to what I spoke of first, we don't work with ICE. We can't be compelled to work with ICE.
I understand that, Chief, but I'm just asking you a general question. ICE exists, okay? They could be a resource. And I'm just saying, is there anything that the town of Belmont, the police department, could ask them to help us with? That's my question. And are you telling me no, there's no help you need from them?
No.
Okay, we've answered that question. My last question is, do we have unvetted people living here in Belmont?
I have no idea.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Hal Shub, and I've got two questions. The first, you mentioned recording videos, and it was interesting to hear that we should not live stream them. What do we do with those videos? And my other question is, I'm the head of the committee that runs the farmers market here in town. We have talked with the chief a little bit. I'd be interested to hearing from the others what we need to keep in mind if ICE agents come to the farmers market looking for people or looking for someone. So those two questions.
My concern with live streaming is that you might provide, that it's about protecting the person that is being arrested. So I'm concerned that there might be something that you don't even realize is being live streamed that could be detrimental for that person. I think making sure you have the recording, date stamp it, narrate it, and then you get it. Maybe then you bring it to. Maybe you bring it to media, or you talk to attorneys, or you find out about that person and how is it going to best help that person. Maybe that person decides, I want this to go to the media, and then they can give the recording to the media, or their family makes that decision, right? So it's not necessarily you making that decision, but somebody who's representing that individual gets to make the decision about whether to make that public or not. And I think that's a good way to go. As far as if ICE turns up and asks you a question, do you know where so-and-so is? Your answer can be, I don't have anything I don't have anything to tell you at this time. You're not compelled to give ICE any information.
And for someone who's in a public space, particularly in charge of an activity in a public space, is there anything that we should do or be careful of or keep an eye on if an action happens?
If an action happens, I'm just trying to. Again, if they are arresting, they've come for very specific people. I think recording it, getting information from the individual. Who's your family member? What kind of information you can get to then move it to the next step.
And we're allowed to ask those questions?
Yes. You might not get answers, but you're allowed to ask the question.
I think what's important is the place where there is liability for people is if you lie to ICE or you attempt to obstruct it. So, for instance, our DAs, we don't in any way interact. We don't know usually what people's status is. We don't interact with ICE. But if an ICE agent were to come in and walk up to my DA and say, is John Smith here at 10 o'clock? And we know that answer. We don't have to go get the answer, but we know the answer, that that's happening. We cannot lie to an agent. And we can't do anything to obstruct because the federal government's been very clear. People are going to get charged with that.
And would they prohibit the person they're detaining from answering questions that somebody in the public asks?
I don't think so. I don't think so.
I would also.
Yeah, you go ahead.
Yeah, I would. The Attorney General just posted some really good information online that goes through all this in detail. So I would encourage people to read this information. I think it's great. And I suspect there'll be more information going up about hotlines and things like that in the near future as they sort these details out. So I would be watching that. But you're not, unlike a court officer, right, you're not obligated to say anything. So you can refuse, if somebody's asking you where so-and-so is, you can just say, I have no information to give you at this time. You're not obstructing, you're just making a statement, right? And then the other thing is if there is an action, you want to make sure to keep a safe distance, record, so you can get that information because that might be valuable to the person or the people that are being detained later. And so I think the most valuable role you can play as a bystander is to record that interaction and try to get information. You know, what's the name of your attorney? Do you have a family member who has information? You know, who do I contact? If you can get that information out in the moment.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, I'm from the neighboring town. My name is Rita Caulfield. I'm from Watertown. After that woman in Somerville was kidnapped, I no longer open the door after sunset, and after Minnesota, I will be calling the police after sunset to make sure that people are properly but what if the situation is I'm driving now and I've been misidentified, for example? What do I do? Do I say, like, try to pull into a public space? Do I go straight to the police station? Like, I don't know who's following me. I don't know if they're ICE. I don't know if they're real cops, you know, or copycatter, you know? What anybody on the panel?
Police Chief MacIsaac. So that's a good question. It's been asked for a long time. So municipal police departments, I'll speak for Belmont. We have in our policy that we do not make routine car stops in unmarked police cars, right? So by routine, I mean, you know, if you're driving along and you're doing fine and there's an unmarked car behind you, it's not the Belmont police trying to stop you, unless somehow your car fits the description to somebody who robbed a bank or robbed a house. There's, you know, there are, I don't want to say never, but there are circumstances. I tell, you know, my own daughter, you know, depending on where you are, to pull over in a well-lit area. One good thing you can do is you can immediately put your hazard lights on and the interior dome light. And, you know, if the officer that's following you, he's going to know that at least you're acknowledging that, or that he or she is behind you, and then pull over to a well-lit area if you
Is
can.
that regular protocol for all police? Like, or do I have to talk to
No,
my...
but, you know, when I tell, you know, so when I give that instructions, you know, to my daughter, I'm relying on that whoever is pulling them over.
So if she's in Framingham,
Is
they'll
aware
act the same
that,
way.
you know, that she's acknowledging that they're behind them with the lights. And, you know, any 99%, you don't want to say never, but, you know, a well-adjusted police officer is going to say, okay, there's a
Right.
female in the car,
I'm
and
not
she's
worried about the
concerned
police, I'm worried
being
about a
pulled up.
copycat,
Yeah.
you know.
And so that's what, you know, you do. And, you know, every place is different. You know, rural police act differently. And, you know, so you know, but that would be my advice.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Enzo Falca from Belmont. We hire a landscaper who cuts the grass, etc. We're recommended by a local real estate agent. He's got a website. Is it possible that a nice agent comes up to the door and says, I want to interview some of those people who are working on your grass? Can we do that? If he's in our house turning on the water, can his ICE agent ask to come into the house to interview somebody?
They could ask, but you don't have to let them in.
We don't have to.
They only have a right to come into your house if they have a judicial warrant signed by a judge. So they might be curious about who's cutting the grass. That's fine. They can come to the door. If you want to let them in, you can let them in, but they don't have a right to come in your house.
How do I know what is the right and what
You
is
can
not
ask them,
right?
do you have a warrant?
But I hear there's an administrative warrant and there's a
Warrant, yeah.
judicial warrant.
Yeah. If
I
they
don't-
show you a warrant, well, let me back up. If they had a judicial warrant, they wouldn't be coming to the door probably saying, can we chat? They would just be executing that warrant. They'd be making that arrest. So if somebody just comes to the door and says, hey, we'd like to talk to the guys who just walked in your door, that's entirely up to you. And probably what I would say is, no thanks, and I would call the police. That is what I would do.
You know, I think might be interesting to know what has happened in the past with law enforcement. So it's typically not ICE that does investigating, right? It's typically HSI or FBI. So when I've had FBI reach out to clients in the past where they want to talk to my client and then they will give their badge number and information and want them to call back, and they might even say they can get a warrant, but there's typically, if it's an ongoing investigation, and that's what this sounds like it would be, there would probably be notice and response, right? It's not typically that ICE is just out fishing looking for information. So they either have a warrant or they don't, or they're either executing on a raid or they're not. So it's not this kind of in between. There's other different agencies within the Department of Homeland Security, FBI, that are actually conducting investigations if there is something, a serious matter. So that's typically how it's been done.
Hi, thanks. I have a question around what used to be safe spaces or public areas, so like schools, hospitals, places of worship, and how that's handled. Like, what in the community do we do? I mean, I know for hospitals because that's my job, but what do you in schools and places of worship where they kind of used to be hands-off and now it looks like everything is a green light? Is there anything that has changed?
I mean, I think the question is, if you're inside the church and it's, you're in there, that's a private space. So I don't think without a warrant they can go in there. Now, when you walk outside the door, they certainly can grab you. I think the same is true for hospitals and schools. We have heard in other places, for instance, that they're sitting in the parking lot of clinics. They don't, they're sitting, we've heard in other places, not here, that they're sitting in the parking lot of clinics. So they don't bother you while you're in there, but when you come out to go get the bus, they're grabbing people. There was a lot of noise about they weren't going to recognize those safe spaces. At least here, that has not been a problem.
Okay.
Yeah.
And would it be legal for us to have like maybe a sanctuary room in a place of worship or like an educational building?
I don't think you need to, because it's not that they have less right to go into the sanctuary room than they do to come in the building.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think that makes a difference.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Mark Sachs. I have a few questions, a lot of which have to do with the fact that, I've seen cops. If you're a cop, you got cops in Belmont, there are federal cops, there are state cops. They wear badges, they have faces you can see, they identify themselves, or they don't identify themselves in a traffic stop, but you can say, okay, Officer Smith or whatever. ICE wears masks. Why? Well, a bunch of questions, you got to time together. One, why is that legal? And two, if I see a bunch of people in masks dragging someone off the street, how are they different, besides that they have been ordained by the state, from any other thugs doing the same thing? And this brings me to a gentleman who brought up the subject of vetting. I think if you want to be a cop, you go through all sorts of psychological tests, you go to a police academy, you get all kinds of training. If you want to be an FBI agent, maybe I've been watching too many shows portraying FBI agents as good guys, but they're basically professionals. They work hard at their jobs, they are trained very seriously for years and years and years. And every now and then I'll see an interview with a police officer who talks about why he does it, the same way, why are you in the Marines? I love my country and I want to serve, that kind of stuff. I have never seen an interview with an ICE officer explaining why they do it. I don't know who vets them. I don't know what kind of training they have. Do they have any? I don't know if they have criminal records, if they simply get picked because people like Trump like them and they get pulled off right-wing websites. I don't know who these people are, and I would worry a lot about that. And a question, you said that they have to identify themselves to other law enforcement. Do they have to identify themselves to anybody else? If I'm around an ICE person who's doing something that I think they shouldn't be, what is your name, sir? That seems like a respectful question. I get the feeling that they don't, that they think they are above all of the laws that all other law enforcement people have to go through. So maybe somebody can elaborate that. Are they above all the laws that everybody has to go through? Does anybody vet them? How are they trained? You're not ICE experts, but do you know? Thanks.
Chief MacIsaac. So First, I guess I'll start with the badge number and things like that. So in Massachusetts, you have to be identified. A police officer has to be identified by at least a number or have a name tag. 99% of the departments have name tags on. Our policy requires that if you ask what their name is, that they tell you what their name is. And ICE, I think, was 2003. Did they come, were they formed? Was it 2003? Or I think was when they were created. You know, they're as Mayor Adams, I saw him in New York City. He was facing the similar question, and he said, you know, they're not a crime organization. They're a legitimate federal law enforcement agency. And I do believe, and this is going from no inside knowledge, but what I see on TV is they are working in conjunction with FBI and other federal agents that you see there. So my, you know, without knowing, I would think that they're vetted and they're, you know, trained in an academy and all that. The masks, what I've, you know, the director of ICE in Massachusetts says the reason they're wearing masks is they don't want to be doxxed. Anyone that doesn't know what doxing is they, you know, they take your picture and they find out who you are and they harass you on social media and things like that. Yeah, I'm just saying that's what, you know, I'm just providing you what I've heard. You know, if we were sitting in Dunkin' Donuts talking, that's what I would tell you. But you know, other than that, they're a legitimate law enforcement agency. I don't know what their policy is on how in depth they have to identify themselves. You know, I think if they kind of come into your house and they have a judicial warrant, you're probably going to see NID with a name. That would be my guess on it, if it's that far.
My name's Marian Melnick. I have a question. One is related to a previous question where he asked if he had lawn service people, and you said you could refuse to have them come into your home. What about on your property? You know, is there a distinction between your home and your property? And the second question is, again, related to service people. You said earlier that you had literature in different languages. I would suggest that Portuguese be one of them. A lot of the people that I know in the cleaners, house cleaners, are Portuguese speaking. And I never have asked people who have worked with me what their status is. And so as far as giving them advice, I don't know how to do that without. And you also talked about a safety plan. Is there specific items in that? Thank you.
So, with respect to the warrant, I would say that your actual property is the same as your house. But they certainly can stand on the sidewalk and talk to somebody who's in your driveway. So, and if that conversation was going on and you didn't want them there, I don't know that I'd go out and get in that back and forth. I would call the police. So, and then to the other questions, you want to do the other?
There's lots of good information in all kinds of languages out there. The ACLU has some great Know Your Rights handouts. So there's the National Immigration Law Project on ILP as well. So there's multiple organizations with literature. I think as far as having a conversation with someone, unless somebody asks you, I just don't think it's appropriate, you know, for you to be having conversation with somebody. But if somebody asks you, you know, there's definitely organizations you can point them to. I can tell you that there's a lot of people, there's hundreds of immigration attorneys and other volunteers out there doing Know Your Rights sessions all over the state. So people are getting information in non-recorded spaces in communities all over the state. So they're getting the information if they're hooked into their communities. What I mean by a safety plan is that if somebody does think they're at high risk of being detained or picked up. So for example, if they are going to, I talked to someone the other day who was going into a court hearing as a witness on behalf of his daughter who was assaulted. And so he was very concerned about what if ICE is there to pick me up, what if they know I'm there? And so we had a whole safety plan in terms of, we knew where his documents were, we had the attorney ready to file a habeas if he was detained, and so we were ready to pull that trigger. In addition, people going in for check-ins, that's another space where if people are, there's certain places where people might be more likely to run into issues, and if they know that they're going to face those things, to have a plan in place. So if they are detained, that action plan can be immediately put into action. So they're friends. They don't have relatives, friend, a neighbor, so there's someone that is aware if they are detained.
And I think one of the most important aspects of the safety plan is what will happen with their kids. So if I'm going to court, my kids are at school, I'm worried I might get detained. Who's picking my kids up? Because if no one shows up to pick up the kids, they're going to DCF. So people just having in place, we certainly tell witnesses and victims in our cases, if that's a worry, figure out who do you want to be the guardian of the kids, where are those numbers, where have you left those numbers, so somebody can pick your kids up.
So I'm Jane Sherwin. I have a question not so much about what I should do as something I want. Sorry. My name is Jane Sherwin. My question is not so much about what I should do as something I want to understand, which is about these administrative warrants. Is that what they're called? I'd like to understand how easy or difficult it is to obtain one of these warrants if you're with ICE, what they go through to obtain such a warrant. Thanks.
It's an internal signature. It's not hard at all. So they just have to have it's not difficult at all. It's an internal signature within the agency. So if they've identified somebody that is out of status or undocumented, and there's a reason for pickup. And so it's not difficult at all.
So could they falsify the information and
No,
get it?
No, they can't falsify information. That would be, well, they could, but then it would come out in court, right?
Right.
So, yeah. Sure, theoretically they could, but they're not going to. The courts have been fairly tough on ICE in terms of their interactions and how, and a lot of the decisions in favor of the defendants have been because of some of the ways things have been executed. They've been executed fairly poorly in a lot of circumstances. And I think, I'm going to use the word lazy. I think some of it has been a little sloppy. And so, that works in the defendant's favor. But again, if you're a bystander in recording, this is what I'm saying, that's evidence that can be used in the future. And that can become very important in these cases.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, I'm Christina. I'm from Lexington. Thank you very much for hosting this. It's really been very helpful. So my question is, I had a couple of questions. So one thing is, I found this really helpful because while, in Lexington and Belmont, we are hearing and being reassured by our police officers that we are in a relatively, safe community. We work, we travel outside of these confines. So one question is, I've spoken to people who live in Everett, look like they might not be citizens, or profiled that way. I'm sorry, I should probably say it that way. And they've talked a lot about seeing a lot of collateral arrests. And so I did not get the impression that is happening as much in this conversation. So I just thought it'd be helpful just to clarify, like that's not really happening, not just in places like Lexington and Belmont, but not being seen in Massachusetts.
So we definitely in Middlesex County have communities with much larger populations of people who might have an ICE issue. Is ICE more present in some of those communities? Yes, they are. You know, we have heard, for instance, that they're at the grocery store parking lot. You know, they are, I don't know, at Dunkin' Donuts. They're around. So yes, there are more. We certainly have towns where there have been more arrests than there have been here in Belmont or maybe in Lexington.
But arrests where ICE says, well, we came for one person and we decided to ask this other person that we suspected. Because that's what people have anecdotally told me. And I didn't, so that did not seem like it was happening in the conversation here.
I don't know that to be happening. What I do think, as you heard, I think it is fairly, well, I know it's fairly easy to get a civil warrant. So they may have civil warrants for 4 or 5 people. I'd really like to get John Smith, but while I'm sitting here, I just saw Joe Sullivan, and I happen to have one for him too.
Okay.
My sense is not that it's just, I'm just sitting here asking random people as they walk by, what's your name? And, oh, maybe I could take you to. That is not my sense.
Okay.
I'm not saying that that has never happened, but it seems to be they more have a pocket full of warrants and they happen to see people they're looking for.
Okay, thank you. And the other question was sort of, I was wondering what we can do as a community to support those in our community who are vulnerable, who are working here, who are vulnerable in these circumstances. You talked about the Know Your Rights resources, encouraging safety plans. Are there other steps that we can take as a community to promote more safety? And also a clarification on the habeas petition. Is that something anyone can do in advance or only if you think you're in imminent?
No.
Okay.
I would say, I don't know if you agree, I would say the best thing that people can do is get the information out. And if someone were to say to you, for instance, I'm worried, I think we have a lot of, I hope it doesn't happen. It is better to have a plan. Like, it's better to have a plan of who's going to pick your kids up and not need it than to hope you don't get detained and your kids don't need to get picked up. I think it is, a frightening prospect to think of getting detained. I think that, like all of us, right, that fear has stopped some people from actually thinking through, I need to put my documents in a certain place, I need to have a plan, who will get the kids, who would I want somebody to call. I think that is a service to the extent people ask you that part of it, of what to do about that. A habeas petition it comes from the Latin, which says you have the body, and when the ICE has the body, you can make a petition to try to get that person brought before the court, to stop them from being ping-ponged all over the place. So you can't do that ahead of time.
Hi, Naomi Ellenberg, Dukas, Belmont. I have 3 questions. I hope I can remember the third one by the time I do the first 2. But Elizabeth, we talked about this twice already, and what is confusing to me is when you're in one of those situations where the person's being dragged off, it's hard for me to imagine that they're going to have time to say, and listen, call my lawyer, here's the number, here's where. So I'm sort of feeling like you're left with this video that's going nowhere. I know Hal asked about it, and I don't see what you can do documenting it if you sort of don't know. Wait, that's one. Let me just get this other 2. The second one I wanted to ask is, Marian, if we have, let's say, a gardener or something that's on the property, I don't see the ICE guys saying, oh, I'm at the edge of your lawn, I'm going to be taking 1 foot in. But could we, if the gardener, let's say, is working, say, you can come into the house? Would that be obstruction or would that not be? To just invite them to come into the house and then call the police to have them, verify or whatever. And my third question, which is the one that keeps me awake at night, is there any possibility you can tell us anything about the possibility of getting anyone back from the concentration camp in El Salvador? I know that's a hot topic, but I just feel like be United States citizens with a concentration camp, and hearing that he wants him to build more concentration camps is unbearable. So those are my 3 questions.
I think people are thinking, typically, if there's someone being picked up and you're witnessing something, maybe that person is with people, they came in a car. You know, it's very unlikely that it's going to be this one single siloed individual that nobody knows anything about. So, for example, they're at the farmer's market, maybe they have something to do with somebody who has a stall there, or they're there with friends. So typically it would be a situation where somebody would know who that person was. So even if they can't get any information out, there's going to be someone there that is going to know how to connect through. I have not seen an individual I don't know, I can't imagine that being the case. I'm sure maybe there could be a situation where that would be the case, but there's probably going to be someone who's connected to that person. They had the car, like, run the license plate, you know, report it into the maybe Andrea Campbell's office, right? I know there are community hotlines. There's a Loose in Everett, I think, is one of the community hotlines. So there are people who will chase that through if there's an incident like that. So there are organizations that will chase that through if that were to happen. But in most situations, there's going to be somebody there, most likely, who would be able to connect the dots, in my experience.
Okay, so the second one about, can you invite them in the house? I think if an ICE agent was trying to talk to somebody and you're saying, come on, quick, in the dining room, would you run the risk that they might try to charge you? Yes, you do. Yeah. I don't know that they would, but you certainly, if they're standing there, they're trying to do it, and you're saying, quick, in the dining room, go. It's somewhat a short-term solution, because they'll sit outside and wait. Eventually, they're going to have to go out of the house.
But at least the police could come and verify.
Yes, if you really didn't know who it was, yes. I think, I think you have to take people at their word. And the federal government is very clear that anybody who is untruthful or who obstructs is going to get charged. Do I think they are looking for some test cases to do that? Yes, I do. So I think it's certainly possible, were you to be seen as interfering with them doing what they want, their job, they would charge people.
So, but realistically, if they're mowing your grass, they'll probably come and grab the car.
Yeah, we haven't been seeing that happening. They really haven't. I think, look, the issue, back to who ICE is, there are some people who actually took these jobs at some point as reasonable federal jobs. I think their job has, like many people in the federal government, their job has become different than they might have thought. And the other piece is, as you heard, there's millions of people who might be eligible to be subject to ICE action. They do not have the personnel to do what they're saying they're going to do. At least here, what we have seen is, yes, they're taking somebody in a grocery store parking lot. They're taking somebody when they're being released from court. I'm not saying it will never happen, but we really haven't seen those kind of situations. They might go to a factory and they're taking a lot of people at that factory. I think they so far have not been looking to provoke a crazy incident. So. I don't know. I think that is beyond my pay grade as to how we do that. I think, that is the federal government to try to figure that out.
Sorry, Michael McNamara, 41 Marlborough Street, Belmont. There are more people behind me, so I'm going to try to be extremely quick. I was wondering if you've heard, even anecdotally, as the DA, about things like, domestic violence victims who are less likely to come forward because they're worried they might be taken away from their kids or deported out of the country, or issues about people who are like, look, we know that there's someone here, they're a bad person, they could be vetted or not vetted, or illegal or not illegal, or undocumented or not undocumented, but they know someone's a threat, but they're worried about reporting the threat, which could affect anyone, documented or not documented, because they're worried they themselves may get deported. So I'm wondering, what is the risk to the community? I think the chief was speaking about it earlier, about people who are vulnerable or victims, but are less likely to come forward and alert the police and the whole community about threats because they're worried they're going to be deported themselves or have a family member targeted. So that's one question.
As I said earlier, do I think there are people that feel threatened and they're not reporting things? Yes. We don't ask people any of their issues. No one is going to call us up and say, I'm not coming to court because I'm afraid that ICE will be there, because they are afraid to tell us that. So we just don't know that. Cable.
Quick, because I know we only have a few minutes. So I seem to, I remember when ICE 9/11, right, became Department of Homeland Security, people started looking at each other weird based on their skin color. So my thought is that this entire operation is just to distract us from real crime, which is people that identify as white. Do you have any statistics or data on how many crimes are committed by people that are undocumented versus not?
I don't, because we don't ever ask. And for instance, when somebody comes in arrested, if Belmont arrests somebody tonight and the police report comes to us tomorrow, it's not going to say anything about their status. It will say, for instance, somebody's place of birth, but I don't know the circumstances of their birth or what's happened to them since or whatever. They could have been born of American parents someplace else. I never have any way of knowing that. The way we ever know that is an ICE agent may show up and say, I'm looking for John Smith. Unless somebody tells us, yeah.
There's national data.
Yeah.
What's the data?
Yeah. You got that?
I don't know I will get the website for anybody that's interested. There's a few different, but it's pretty well documented that it's far less crime committed by undocumented individuals than us.
So hi, my name is Jennifer, and I'm actually from Arlington. Thank you so much for having me, Belmont. And Liz and I actually doesn't remember me, and it was nice to see you. We worked together at Tufts many, many years ago. I actually work for a very small legal aid organization, within a large social service organization. I'm not an attorney, and we do very little immigration work, but those calls are starting to tick up. So this question is more anecdotal, or Liz, your sense. So the calls we get are from people who are at 200% of federal poverty and below, so very low income, low resource. They've had maybe a family member that's been detained and they're sort of desperately looking for an attorney, or somebody is calling who is maybe out of status or in one status, and now the government is squeezing them and they're trying to have access to legal aid to get into another status or start to apply for another status. I'm really concerned that I'm giving people kind of a cycle of referrals where those legal aid organizations are so overwhelmed. I don't know if you can speak to that a little bit. And then if somebody is detained without an attorney, what does that potentially look like when they've been detained? And that may be a question for Attorney Ryan as well. But thank you.
I think that's the truth is, the sad state of affairs is that there's not enough legal resources to help these people. And again, I know that the state has allocated some funds, and that Mira and Susan Church's office is working on different ways to try to maximize resources for individuals, but it's expensive to hire immigration attorneys. There are legal aid organizations. They are all overwhelmed. Like Marian is a very good one. Catholic Charities. They're all overwhelmed and understaffed, and there's just not enough good resources to go around. That's just a fact. Somebody else asked earlier about what we can do. I think one thing that we all keep missing is that we need immigration reform, and I know that we don't, that Democrats don't control the House or the Senate, but we have a state delegation that is majority Democrat, and they should be advocating for actual good law, not just talking points. Right? And we also have our own representative, Catherine Clark, is the whip in the House, and she let a good 15, 20 people vote rogue for the Lake and Riley Act. And this is my personal opinion. I just think that was a big miss. And so we need to hold our elected officials accountable. I think she's, great representative. They missed the ball on this. They missed the ball on immigration all the time. And why? They shouldn't be. So we should hold our elected officials accountable to be more fluent with immigration and be advocating for actual things that work. Like, one thing I can tell you right now, it's pretty simple, a guest worker program might alleviate a lot of what we're seeing right now. You could put 11 to 14 million people into a guest worker program right away. We know where they are. Employers would have to pay decent wages. You could hold employers as well as individuals accountable, but we're not doing anything that's common sense. We're just doing spectacle right now. But we can we can encourage our own elected officials to be rational and keep pushing that message. So.
Hi, I'm Katrin Otternes, Belmont resident. I know somebody who told me about an incident where ICE came to their workplace, detained one of their coworkers. The coworker was a college student, I think, probably around 19 years old. They were detained for a while. I don't know if it was a judicial or administrative warrant, so I'm not certain on the details there. But what ended up happening is that they had detained the wrong person. So I was just curious if there's any kind of accountability, legal or otherwise, for mistakes like that when they are made. If there's anything those coworkers could have done to be helpful. As you can imagine, I'm sure that was really a traumatic experience for that person going through all that. So thank you.
Legal permanent residents and legal permanent residents and anybody here in the United States are required to carry documentation. So that's always been the case. It just hasn't really been enforced. So, it's starting with that, right? If somebody is here in a visa status, like a student visa, they are required to carry their documents on them, and because they can be asked to produce them. So that's just a proactive way to maybe avoid a case of mistaken identity. Unfortunately, there's probably not a lot, that somebody can do if they were ultimately released. And I don't know the circumstances of where they were held. Were they questioned and then released? So but I don't think there's much recourse.
Hi, G. Mooney, Belmont. I wanted to get clarity on houses of worship because earlier I think it was said that, they're not really going into houses of worship or it's safe there. What I read in January, again in March, was that in a house of worship that a foyer or a parking lot could be considered a public space. And unless you have a sign on the door that says private, then those are distinctions. So the question is whether or not houses of worship should actually have offices that are places that are labeled private, because I had read that a foyer or parking lot is not considered private property, or it is private property, but it is not seen that way for ICE for warrants. So I wanted, one might be practice, but one is what is actual authority. So I want to give advice to houses of worship in Belmont if we should be labeling places private.
I think the parking lot, ICE does consider fair game. I think they consider it the same as the grocery store. I don't know how much I think, if they wanted to act in a house of worship, how much I think the sign would stop them. If there was a service going on or something and you happened to have a sign, if they made that decision that they were going to go to houses of worship, I don't know that would change things. So far, even though there was a lot of talk that they weren't going to do that in hospitals and they sent everybody into a panic, I have not heard, neither here nor anywhere else, that I think there was just so much outrage about that, that actually that did seem to penetrate, and I haven't seen any of that happen. Yeah.
I just want to thank everybody for coming, and especially our speakers who are extraordinary. We are so lucky